The increase in overdose deaths in the United States is a concerning phenomenon that has received attention in recent years. It is noted that the significant increase in the number of deaths began in 2020, coinciding with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. This increase is attributed to several factors, but primarily to the adverse effects the pandemic has had on the mental health and well-being of people addicted to drugs. The COVID-19 pandemic brought with it a number of challenges that profoundly affected people struggling with drug addiction. The confinement and social distancing measures imposed to contain the spread of the virus led to increased social isolation, anxiety, and depression in many people. For those struggling with addiction, these factors may have exacerbated their mental health problems and increased their vulnerability to relapse and overdose. In addition, the pandemic has disrupted many addiction prevention and treatment services and programs, making it even more difficult for people to access the help they need. The lack of access to mental health and addiction treatment services, combined with the additional stress caused by the pandemic, has created an environment conducive to increased overdose deaths. The impact of fentanyl on overdose deaths is an issue of great concern due to the dangerousness of this drug and its significant contribution to the addiction crisis in the United States. Fentanyl is an extremely potent drug, up to 50 times more powerful than heroin and up to 100 times more powerful than morphine. It is a synthetic opioid that is used both medically and illegally. In the context of overdose deaths, fentanyl has emerged as a leading cause of death. According to data presented in a graph, fentanyl was responsible for the majority of overdose deaths in 2020 and accounted for 66% of all overdose deaths in 2021. This alarming figure underscores the seriousness of the problem and the need to address it urgently. Illegal fentanyl, which is clandestinely produced and distributed, is of particular concern due to its potency and the risks associated with its use. This drug is often adulterated and mixed with other substances such as heroin, cocaine, and methamphetamine, which further increases its dangerousness. Many people who use these drugs may not be aware that they are ingesting fentanyl, increasing the risk of overdose and death. The widespread availability of illegal fentanyl in the illicit drug market has made this substance a serious public health problem in the United States. Communities across the country are facing a growing addiction crisis, with an alarming number of people losing their lives to overdoses of fentanyl and other drugs. The potential geopolitical implications of the fentanyl crisis raise concerns about whether China is using this drug as a tool to weaken the United States, following a historical pattern similar to the West's use of opium against China in the 19th century. The suspicion that China is shipping fentanyl to the United States as a geopolitical undermining tactic has generated concern among some U.S. policymakers and has led to calls for aggressive diplomatic action with China to address this problem. The analogy to the history of opium in China in the 19th century is significant. During that period, the British and other Western countries flooded the Chinese market with opium to counter a trade deficit with China, which eventually led to the Opium Wars and the imposition of unfavorable treaties on China. This historical episode, known as the Century of Humiliation, remains a sensitive issue in China and has influenced the country's perception of relations with the West. Some U.S. policymakers have raised concerns that China is using fentanyl as a form of revenge or retaliation against the United States. They have suggested that China may be allowing chemicals needed for fentanyl production to reach Mexican drug cartels, which then use them to manufacture the drug and distribute it in the United States. This theory raises the possibility that China is using fentanyl as a tool to weaken U.S. society and undermine its stability. In response to these concerns, some politicians have urged more aggressive diplomatic action with China to address the fentanyl problem. They have called for greater cooperation between the United States and China to stem the flow of synthetic drugs and precursor chemicals contributing to the fentanyl crisis. However, China has rejected the accusations and claimed that the fentanyl crisis is an internal U.S. problem, attributing responsibility to big pharma corruption, weak U.S. laws and the U.S. drug culture. What do you think about this issue? Do you think it is really an attack by China on the U.S.? I read you in the comments. U.S. China cooperation in the fight against fentanyl has been the subject of attention due to difficulties that have arisen, especially after certain political events that have strained relations between the two countries. Historically, China has been a major supplier of precursor chemicals used in the manufacture of fentanyl and other synthetic drugs. As fentanyl became a major concern in the U.S. opioid crisis, there was growing interest in collaborating with China to address this problem. For a time, China cooperated with the United States in regulating and controlling the production and export of precursor chemicals used in the manufacture of fentanyl. This included measures such as classifying certain chemicals as controlled and imposing tighter restrictions on their production and distribution. However, this cooperation has been affected by a series of political events that have deteriorated U.S.-China bilateral relations. For example, the visit of Nancy Pelosi, Democratic leader of the U.S. House of Representatives, to Taiwan was seen as an affront by China, which considers Taiwan to be part of its territory. As a result of these events and other political disagreements, U.S.-China cooperation in the fight against fentanyl has declined. In addition, the United States has imposed economic sanctions on Chinese individuals and companies involved in the trade of equipment and precursor chemicals used in the manufacture of fentanyl. These sanctions are intended to put pressure on China and deter its involvement in drug trafficking-related activities. The future prospects for U.S.-China cooperation are the subject of debate and analysis, especially amid rising geopolitical and trade tensions between the two world powers. While efforts have been made to enhance cooperation in areas such as anti-fentanyl, there are significant challenges that could hinder genuine engagement. One of the main obstacles to stronger cooperation is the growing geopolitical rivalry between the United States and China. The two countries have divergent interests in various regions of the world and compete for political and economic influence. This rivalry has intensified in recent years, especially in areas such as the South China Sea, Taiwan, and the Indo-Pacific in general. In addition, trade tensions between the United States and China have also complicated the possibility of closer cooperation. The trade war initiated by the Trump administration and continued to some extent under the Biden administration has generated significant friction in bilateral trade relations. Disputes over unfair trade practices, intellectual property, and technology have also contributed to mutual distrust and have hindered efforts for broader cooperation. In this context, while certain issues such as the fight against fentanyl may represent areas of potential cooperation, genuine engagement is unlikely to occur as long as other geopolitical and trade issues between the United States and China persist. To move toward greater cooperation, both sides would need to effectively address their differences and work toward a more stable and constructive relationship. However, this would require a significant degree of political will and commitment on both sides, which may be difficult to achieve in the short term given current geopolitical and economic dynamics. Thank you very much for staying until the end of the video, my friend, and if you liked the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to make sure you don't miss any of my videos.